Well, good afternoon, everyone, and I'm delighted to welcome you to Compeer's WealthTech webinar for 2021. And first, I must thank our sponsors, Athena Global and Objectway, for their continued support in the running of these webinars. So what a previous 12 months it's been and how the world has changed. But one thing that remains is that the UK wealth management industry continues to break records and it continues to grow. And one key reason for this is its resilience in all market conditions and also its adaptability. And we've seen the industry embrace technological changes, and therefore a focus of today is to discuss how technology can and will shape the industry going forward. So during the next hour or so, we have 3 interesting presentations for you, and they'll be followed by a panel discussion to end the webinar. So let's get started with our first presentation. And to kick us off, and speaking on behalf of Athena Global, we have Neil Bridger, and he's going to be reviewing automation and how it's the next frontier in wealth tech. Welcome, Neil, and over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, James. Thank you for the introduction. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Neil Bridger. I actually work for Athena Global, and I'm the UK director. And very much in line with James's introduction, what I'd like to talk to you today is about automation, and it being the next frontier within the wealth tech business. Could I have my first slide, please? So I'm going to start with some pretty basics in terms of the challenges that we have within the wealth business. And no secrets here in terms of we're working to increase our profits by fundamentally increasing revenue, which fundamentally means more clients, more successful clients, as well as reducing our costs. So becoming more efficient in how we operate and how we work. And naturally, we're all faced with a number of limiting factors, but I've highlighted 3 key areas that I'd like to talk about here. First one, staff productivity. As it suggests, we're limited to the amount of clients one wealth manager can actually handle, but also in terms of the processes and the steps that need to be taken by an individual wealth manager, for example. And naturally, we have the regulatory burden that we are all very aware of, and year on year seems to grow. And the capability statement around systems integration for me and for Athena is actually the answer in terms of how we can actually become more productive, how we can lessen that burden on us through our systems integration capability. So for me, technology is often the answer. And with the bandwidth that we all have within wealth management, and indeed some of the skills, that's where Athena can assist. Can I have my next slide, please? So the case in point I'd like to discuss today is very much about client onboarding, something we're all very familiar with and we understand in depth. And there's a statement here from Compeer, our colleagues Compeer, in terms of the average it takes a wealth manager just to onboard a new client can often be up to 1 month. And the example that we've got here is that on Nutmeg, we're all familiar with, can take just less than 24 hours. Now, I'm very conscious about measuring apples with apples, and I'm also conscious that size and scale of Nutmeg should be taken into account, and the fact that they've started with a clean sheet. But there obviously can be lessons learned and best practices that Nutmeg and our digital users have employed to accelerate and to speed up how we operate and how we work on a daily basis. Could I have my next slide, please? Okay, so diving into client onboarding, and there's 3 key areas I'm keen to discuss, which is KYC, something we live with every day in terms of knowing your customer. And data capture itself is often a challenge and is very much part of why sometimes it takes us so long to onboard a client. I can see literally hand-filled, paper-based systems that are completed, then need to be keyed into our systems and rekeyed. And sometimes they're miskeyed, they're transcribed incorrectly. And indeed, there might even be some misunderstanding of the question by the client. And therefore, there is often a circle going back to the client to make sure that we've got the right information. And something such as a digital web app is much more efficient. Obviously, takes out any need to rekey, but also it can start to stress some of the key fields, making them mandatory, allowing us to progress on an application. Also, what we can do is we can identify key answers, key questions, and therefore remove or indeed include any sections that either aren't required or obviously are required based on previous answers, and therefore we can start to manage on a exception basis rather than a step-by-step basis. I'd also talk about identity validation as well. And identity validation as well is often very manual, very human. Someone will literally bring a passport or a driving license or some form of identification, which is often photocopied and then is entered manually onto a system. So something such as AI, which we all know as artificial intelligence, or ML, which is machine learning, can actually start to capture some of that data, look for the respective fields, and populate the systems that you've got automatically for you. And again, this is just about speeding up the onboarding process. Then we've got credit checks and AML, anti-money laundering. Again, often, credit check is about third party. It's a third-party app. Again, it's a manual process where we're going on, we're logging on, we're getting data, and then we're editing and entering data onto our own systems. And again, that's something that RPA can do automatically and start to report and produce, kind of exception-based reporting rather than step-by-step manual reporting. Which brings us across to process management. And process management is very much about workflow management. And it's about how we start to move away from that daily task management and start to produce the exception reports that I've spoken about with management information, and therefore starting to run the business on an exception basis rather than a daily step-by-step basis. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay, and this is where Athena can assist. So we're a global provider of integration services and solutions, and we do have our own bespoke 4-step automation process. It starts obviously with discovery, and therefore we move into define, deploy, and operate. And obviously discovery is very important because we're all potentially at different parts and different places. Therefore, it's very keen that we define how we want this to look based on where you are today rather than where we need to get to. Also, the thing about obviously the way that we operate is it's about getting things right first time, so that any investment that's being made in this is maximised, and therefore the automation actually works correctly. We have a track record in this. We've done it all over the world. Specifically, one bank we've done onboarding where we've streamlined very manual processes up to a 60% increase in efficiency. And more importantly, I think the enhanced engagement from the client and from the users is a big plus as well. The other example we've got here is a firm called ID Analytics, where we've done some automation in the credit and fraud risk area. But again, what we're doing is we're taking very manual processes through RPA, we're automating them and then turning them into exception and MI, which means that we can understand any bottlenecks in the process, any issues, so we can focus on moving things forward and driving the correct actions and activity. We only specialize in sort of 4 key areas, actually. RPA, as we've said, robotic process automation, AI and ML, as I've mentioned before, data and blockchain. And data for me is key here. It's very much around data management. As we start to put digital front ends on our systems, it's very key that we have the expertise and the subject matter knowledge around how we integrate the data. And that's often the key to success in any of our transformational activities. And then just moving forward in terms of our client services mindset. Athena, we're a small size company, only 300 FTEs globally. And we work on approximately, it says there are 50 projects. That's what we've got active at the moment. But the important thing here is we're not a very large corporation. So therefore, we're the right size to recognize exactly your needs, work with you. And you're certainly not a small fish in a big pond. And we respond appropriately. And we always ensure that we deliver the business value that we stand up for at the start, and we track that going forward. So that's a little bit about Athena and how we can help in the onboarding and the automation of very, very manual processes. I think if we move to the last slide, I think we're there. So that was very, very quick in terms of just an overview of how we can help you in the new era, as it were, post-COVID, to start to automate, put less manual processes into your system and start to be more effective. there's my email on neil@athenagt.com. If you have any questions or if you'd like any further discussions, please give me an email, and I look forward to hearing from you. And thank you very much for listening. James.
Thank you very much, Neil. And next we have my colleague Tom Thwaites from Compeer, and he's going to be sharing some of our most recent research findings. So welcome, Tom, and over to you now.
Thank you very much, James. Hello and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Tom Thwaites. I'm an analyst here at Compeer, and today I'll be using some of our benchmarking data to evaluate the current state of technology within wealth management and take a look at what impact the pandemic is having on the pace of technological change. So my next slide, please. My first chart here tracks the total IT costs for the last 7 years. In the red bars, we have data for all firms in the industry, and then in the blue bars here, we are only focusing on the wealth managers, so stripping out all of the exo stockbrokers. Now, just to clarify, when I say total IT costs here, I mean the combination of all IT staff costs, information services such as Bloomberg costs, IT non-staff costs such as systems and hardware, and then any outsourced costs related to IT services. Now, since 2014, IT spending has been growing at an average rate of 4.9% per year. And with the changes made in the last 12 months, the investment into technology is only expected to accelerate. Firms have been forced to bring their digital transformation processes well ahead of schedule and implement large-scale changes in order to continue operating while working from home. We could therefore say that by 2025, it's highly likely that the wealth management industry as a whole will be spending in excess of £1 billion on IT and other digital services per year. In response to the pandemic, I think the industry surprised itself at how quickly it was able to adapt. Staff were all given the appropriate hardware to work from home, and just like we are now, either using Teams or Zoom, business as usual was maintained in the most part. Although some of the firms who rely more heavily on legacy systems and manual processes found themselves playing catch up. Next slide, please. Now, we can quite easily measure the rising level of IT spend using a graph like on my last slide. However, to measure the actual benefits and returns of technology is less straightforward. So to see if these investments are paying off and generating gains in efficiency, I've used the ratio of IT costs as a percentage of revenue to track this. What we can see from both lines is that this trend has remained pretty flat since 2014, around 10.5%. In this time, we've seen strong revenue growth in the industry, rising on average of 4.6% per year. So we may have expected this to improve slightly more than it has. Also, as margins and AUM levels remain under pressure, and as IT spending grows in reaction to the pandemic, these conditions will only make it harder to generate efficiency gains in the coming years. Currently, the front office is receiving the most attention, with the onboarding process and CRM systems getting a much needed overhaul to digitize and automate many tasks, which currently create friction and frustrate front office staff. This not only gives firms an opportunity to boost front office productivity, but act as a platform to ensure that data is collected in the right way to align with the rest of their digital strategy. Next slide, please. Now, looking in more detail, we can see the disparity within the industry when it comes to IT spend. The graph on the left here shows us the spread among wealth managers in each spending bracket. This chart is largely designed to show you how wide the spread is in spending across the industry. The average has increased slightly, with the proportion of firms in the 10 to 12% bracket rising up to 21%, up from 14% 2 years ago. But there's still a large group of spending less than 6% of revenue on IT, and some spending well in excess of 20%. So it appears there's no general agreement about what the optimal level is to spend. So to try and find this optimal value, we can take a look at the chart on the right here, which compares the average profit margin across the same brackets of IT spend as the chart on the left. Now, this actually shows us that the more firms spend on IT, the less profitable they become, but this is not how this should be interpreted. What needs to be taken into account is that the bands for firms are based on a cost as a percentage of revenue, Therefore, by definition, profit will be higher for the groups with the lower costs. Therefore, the key takeaway from this should be that if your firm is in a position where IT costs exceed 12% of total revenue, it will have a more significant impact on your profit margin, as the return on investment does not seem to be sufficient to compensate for the higher costs. Then, if your IT costs exceed 18% of revenue, you're highly likely to be in a loss-making position as a result. However, those who are able to keep this figure below 12% are in a strong position to keep a profit margin of around 20%. Next slide, please. So while some of the data on the last slide may indicate the benefits of spending less, I wanted to show some figures which actually show that spending more can be beneficial and that your investment into IT is actually working. So when we look at IT costs per front office professional compared to managed assets per front office professional, I'm pleased to say that we find a positive correlation, which supports the theory that if you are able to spend more on IT and digital services, then it can have a positive impact on productivity by allowing individuals to take on more clients and more assets, and as a result, bring in more revenue. In the current climate, remote working could support further developments to the front office. Prior to lockdown, a lot of time would have been spent traveling to and from client meetings or going out to visit prospective clients. The rise of virtual meetings can significantly reduce the travel time associated with meeting clients and allow staff to communicate with more clients on a daily basis. Beyond the pandemic, advisors are likely to maintain some degree of virtual meetings for more routine checkups with clients. However, the more complex meetings, and especially meeting with new clients for the first time, will benefit the most from the return of face-to-face contact. Next slide, please. Driving a lot of the change in the industry is the changing expectations of clients. So my final two slides here will take a look at what the clients want to see from technology from the results of our recent end investor research, which covered 500 clients from a random sample of UK wealth management firms. Now, technology has played a huge role in enhancing the client lifecycle, with the aim to make doing business with your firm as easy as possible for the end investor, which has been more relevant than ever over the last 12 months. And while these services have come a long way in recent years, there is still appetite for more. Experiences with other fintech solutions and in other industries have shown clients what they could expect to see from digital, even if it's not quite there in wealth management. As a result, across these four main areas of client portals, mobile apps, reporting and onboarding processes, we found that almost 50% of clients all requested either significant or very significant improvements needed to be made by their current wealth provider. Most notably, when looking at the responses for the investors under the age of 40, these figures jumped to almost 60% requesting improvements. As the key area for growth in the coming years, firms looking to use digital as a method to stand out and not just as a hygiene factor can capitalize on the growth prospects of the younger clients who have less brand loyalty but much higher demand for technology. Next slide, please. With such a high proportion of clients requesting improvements, it might suggest that the existing services are not up to standard, which is not entirely true. When we asked investors how they rate the quality of their wealth managers' digital services, the responses were very positive, and 42% feel they are above their expectations. Although with almost 1 in 5 responding, these services are below their expectations, there's still plenty of work to be done in order to align your services with your clients' expectations. One area in which technology has stood out the most in the last 12 months especially has been maintaining communication with the client while working from home. We found that 89% of clients received either the same or an increased level of communication with their advisor compared to pre-pandemic levels. Now, as we adapt to the next normal, it'll be interesting to see how much the engagement model reverts back to the face-to-face meetings and how many clients are happy to continue using these digital channels, which have more than proved their value over the last 12 months. So that concludes my presentation for this afternoon. I would like to thank you all once again for joining us. I hope you enjoy the rest of the webinar. And now I will pass back over to our host for today. So back over to you, James.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. And I should mention that we will be sharing the slides, so all of these stats that Tom put up will be made available to you shortly after the webinar is finished. But I'm now very pleased to introduce our third speaker. So we have Tariq Khan from Objectway, and he's going to be outlining why digital improvement is a must-have in this industry. Welcome, Tariq, and I'll now pass over to you.
So I'm excited to be able to present why digital improvement is a must-have in the next normal. And I want to start by giving you some context, which I think you're going to find interesting. So during the pandemic, according to Oliver Wyman, there's been a 7 to 10-fold increase in client engagement across all digital channels. And as we've seen from the Compeer data, clients want significant improvement, particularly at specific digital touchpoints. At the same time, IT and operational efficiency varies drastically across the industry, and most firms are actually not scalable. Firms can, and I think must, use digital change to improve the client experience, improve scale, improve efficiency, and free up time for their own employees, like front office, as we've mentioned before. So what does a payback look like? Well, according to McKinsey, digital transformation with a focus on client experience can improve client satisfaction by 20 to 30%, and also yield to economic gains of 20 to 50%. Now, these are big numbers, and I'm going to show you how wealth management firms can and actually are achieving these outcomes. Next slide, please. So this is what I'm going to cover today. Give you a couple of seconds to look at it. Next slide, please. Okay, so a bit about Objectway. So for those of you who don't know, Objectway is a global fintech firm. We've been partnering with UK wealth managers for 30 years and provide them with a fully integrated front to back office software solutions. You can see some of the clients here. A couple of interesting facts from this slide. We host 60% of our clients on private cloud as they're looking to achieve scale, and 10% of our revenues are pumped back into research and development every year. So innovation is a key priority. Next slide, please. So what do the solutions look like? Well, Objectway's WealthTech suite is designed to do 4 things. One, it's designed to improve the client experience, and you can do that through modules such as the portal, client lifecycle management. The second is to improve advisor productivity and also innovate investment solutions. I'll give you an example. So the portfolio management solution has a portfolio optimizer that uses AI, which suggests products based on client preferences. The integrated risk engine has an embedded data quality service at the back. And then finally, it's there to enable automation and straight-through processing, all the way from the front to the back office. So hopefully you get a bit of an idea of who we are and what we do. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to focus on some of the current challenges and threats with respect to digital improvement. They're quite basic, but they're difficult to overcome, I think. So the first one I'm going to look at is clients' digital demands. Clients want a better overall experience. They want it to be personalized, and they want to be able to access it on demand. A direct threat to this is digitally savvy competition. Now, this might be within wealth management firms themselves, but I'm using the example of the FANGs. For those of you who aren't familiar with this, this is US big tech, basically. So Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. And then the other big challenge is inefficient IT and operation. Most wealth management firms are burdened with legacy architecture. And that isn't an issue within itself, but the components don't speak to each other very well. And as a result, there's lots and lots of manual workarounds, which are completely inefficient and just don't support scale. So I'll go through each of these in a bit more detail. Next slide, please. Okay, let's have a look at client demands. If you focus your attention first on the left-hand side of the slides, what's this telling us? It's telling us that the uptake of digital engagement during the pandemic has been very impressive. You know, for example, 7 to 10-fold increase in client engagement, a 4 to 5-fold increase in digital research consumption. But I think what's more important is that this is set to stay. This is how clients want to engage with wealth management firms, and this is the level of engagement they're going to expect. However, it's very important to notice here that this is not replacing face-to-face contact. In fact, 3/4 of clients would prefer to interact with humans more often as tech improves. Okay, if you focus your attention to the right-hand side of the slide, so the white bit of the slide, these are the percentage of clients suggesting significant or very significant improvements at some critical points. So client portal, client reporting, onboarding, and ESG. And I've put year-on-year data where it was available. So if you have a look first, I mean, these are significant numbers anyway, but look how much it's changed year on year. So for example, client portal, it's from 31% to 47% of clients now wanting significant improvements. And as we saw from the Compeer data, this is even higher for under 40s. Have a look on the right-hand side. This is quite startling for me anyway. These are the percentage of clients that are suggesting that they will actually leave if improvements aren't made. So for client portal, it's over 40%. Client reporting, 60%. ESG, 60%. I mean, this is telling me that, you know, traditionally wealth managers have had a sticky client base, but I think this is going to change. Next slide, please. Okay, let's have a look at the threat from the FANGs. So first of all, Amazon's in insurance. Google does checking accounts and has financial institution partners such as Citigroup. So they're not actually that far away from wealth management. And what this graphic is showing is areas where wealth management is perceived to be weak. I'll quickly explain. So the green circles at the bottom denote the percentage of clients or high net worth investors who believe that this touch point gives them a wow impact on the firm. So for example, 44% of high net worth investors believe onboarding provides a wow impact for the firm. The orange circles at the top show the percentage of investors who are not satisfied with their current service. So for example, 60% of high net worth investors are not happy with their personal updates they're receiving. And then the blue circles in the middle show the areas where high net worth investors think the FANGs actually outperform wealth management. So there's a couple of touch points there. Again, personalized updates is one of them. Receiving educational market information is another one. What do we get from this? I mean, again, it just shows the importance of maybe prioritizing particular touch points. And if I was a wealth management firm, I'd probably look at the areas that produce a wow impact and work on these first. Next slide, please. Okay, inefficient IT and operations. Okay, this is a big subject within itself. We've already seen that there's lots of variation in IT costs as a percentage of revenue and operational costs as a percentage of revenue. I'm going to use that to mean efficiency. So what I'm saying is there's huge variation of efficiency within the industry. And obviously this trickles down as well into the bottom line, because even though the average pre-tax profit margin is 24%, it's healthy. But 4 out of 10 wealth managers reported a pre-tax profit margin of 10% or less. That includes loss-making firms. And then when you look at it, 7 out of 10 firms are not scalable. I mean, that is a big number. And if you look at scale year on year for 3 years or 5 years consecutively, then actually, unfortunately, that number is going to be even higher. Okay, because we have so many inefficiencies, partly due to legacy architecture that doesn't speak to each other, too much paper, not enough automation, which leads to manual errors, lots of time being spent on this. Wealth management firms just aren't able to keep up with innovation. I mean, they have to keep the wheels turning. I mean, I think digital change can really transform this, and incremental change can really transform this. So it doesn't have to be a massive project. And I'm going to show you how actually in the next slide. Next slide, please. So this is a case study. This wealth management client, a wealth management firm. It's one of Object-Based clients, and they had the following business goals. They wanted to grow the client base, increase digital penetration, improve the advisor's efficiency and time they could spend with clients, and improve the bottom line, operating margins and profits. So we worked with the client, and they leveraged Object-Based WealthTech suite. And we decided that incremental change was the best way to ensure success. So there were 3 phases to achieving these business goals. The first phase was implementing a portfolio management solution and integrating it into a legacy back office. This took 6 months. The second phase was implementing an investor portal. This was to ensure that clients could get on-demand access, get tailored reports, etc. And this also took 6 months. And then the final phase, phase 3, was looking at the client lifecycle management. So this looked at prospecting all the way to onboarding, and also ongoing events such as suitability and ad hoc events. Next slide. Let's have a look at what the outcomes look like. Okay, I'll give you a couple of seconds actually to read them, and I'll pick a few. But I mean, this firm achieved some fantastic outcomes. Increased AUM by 25% in 3 years. So this is the year after everything was implemented. They increased digital penetration from 30 to 50%, and they're now targeting 80% in the next 3 years. Advisor capacity has increased by 25%, and they're actually expecting this to increase by over 50% in the next 3 years. Imagine how much more time the advisor now has to attend to value-added services and speak to clients. And they've boosted client satisfaction rate from a net promoter score of 43 to a good score about 50, so 53. I've kind of run through this, and it's quite high level. So if anybody wants to talk about this in more detail or any of the topics, let me know, and we can organise a time. Next slide, please. Okay, so key takeaways. Clients are demanding more from their digital experience, but face-to-face is still key. I believe firms have to prioritise critical touch points, especially the ones that we saw on the slide with the fangs. Maybe start with the ones that have a wow impact for clients. Scalable integrated solutions can really transform operational efficiency and free up time for advisors. And the proof is in the pudding. We've seen it in the case study. I think firms that aren't able to not just keep up, but innovate will really struggle to survive. Thank you. Next slide, please. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Tarek, for all those insights, and I'm glad that you resolved the microphone issues. And so to finish our webinar, we have a panel discussion so that we can hear the views from within wealth management firms. So please note that if you wish to pose a question to our panel, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screens. So feel free to use this throughout the discussion, and I'll look to get as many of these questions answered as possible. Now, on our panel today, I'm delighted to be joined by Nick Rosser, who's the head of IT at Saunderson House. We have Chris Handley, the IT Strategy and Change Director at Rathbones, and Simon Boyley, the head of IT and Business Solutions at LGT Vestra. So very much welcome to each of you, and I'll get cracking with the first question. It's a nice broad one asking, what are the most significant changes to your firm have you seen in the past 12 months? And so let's start with Nick on what you've seen at Saunderson House, please.
Thank you, James. I think if we're looking at the most significant changes in the last 12 months, I mean, clearly the first and fundamental one is going to be around working practice and working location that sits alongside that. So we have had our offices pretty well closed, with small exceptions for a period of time as the government allowed at the tail end of last year. And that has meant some differences when we used to have a lot of staff working in the office primarily. So paper is one factor. Post when you're working remotely is a key thing that we've seen a change on, and that has really forced us to go down a road where we are no longer utilising the postal service, certainly to the level that we were, and that has allowed us to expedite a program of work that was in flight anyway, and has allowed us to use other technology solutions, as we're in a technology forum today, to help us move forward with that type of transition. Work that would have probably taken a number of years got completed within a number of weeks, I think, as a number of people probably saw during the pandemic. From a wider sort of technology perspective, actually we were in a fairly fortunate place in that we've done a lot of business planning already in terms of provisioning sort of remote working and those types of solutions to staff. So that didn't fundamentally change the way we worked, but I think what it has done is allowed staff to generally give themselves the comfort that working from home is something that they can do on a more regular basis should they need to in the future. And I think that probably will impact the way in which we decide to work moving forward. There's a couple of small highlights there.
Thank you, Nick. And Chris, how about you at Rathbones? What changes have you seen in the past 12 months?
Thanks, James. I think Nick has really hit the nail on the head, really, and we've had a very similar experience at Rathbones. We're a traditional wealth management company, high touch, eye-to-eye contact and client experience. And moving from that working practice of being able to have those face-to-face meetings, with a nice printed, client meeting pack and maybe evaluation pack that they can run through, to actually how do we manage that on a technology platform has been it's been quite interesting, to be quite honest. We've had really good adoption from across the firm on Teams, Zoom, encrypted email, e-signatures, reduction in post and paper, digital note taking. The list kind of goes on really. And really, I think the trick now is to ensure that we kind of capture and nurture that digital complement moving forward, and we, like I say, complement the client experience with technology. And I think Tom and Tarek also picked on it earlier with, how do we, face-to-face is still going to be a big part of our business. How does our new digital capabilities fit into that, and how do we have that client choice?
Thank you. How about you, Simon, at Vestra?
Thanks, James. Really similar experiences to Chris and Nick. So I think one of the noticeable things for me was the appetite in our business to change processes and question things that wouldn't have been questioned in the past. So we've had a really sort of big year of change, which has been great. I think also, as Chris was saying, we are a traditional wealth manager as well, and we, in that high touch client relationship, face-to-face meetings, lunches with clients sort of space. And what I've been really impressed to see in the business is how we found different ways to engage with clients. So not just Zoom meetings replacing in place face-to-face meetings, but different types of events that our marketing team have found to engage the attention of our clients. And let's not forget what happened at the start of this pandemic. The markets were absolutely horrendous, and it was a really worrying time for clients. So we've been communicating a lot more with clients in different ways than we have in the past, and that's had a really positive result. And it's been really interesting to watch just how many new clients we've won this year, clients that we've never met face to face, and that was just not something we would have imagined pre-pandemic.
Sure. So obviously there's been very much significant changes, but there's always a benefit of hindsight. So is there actually anything that now you can look back that you would have done differently about how your firm has approached these challenges of the pandemic? And I'll start with Simon on this one.
Yeah, I guess we're really fortunate that we've made a lot of investments in technology in the last 5 years. So we were really well placed to move to home working. I think probably one of the things that we didn't see at the start was how long this period of home working would last. And sort of 18 months, 2 years, it seems to be the period that we'll have people working at home. So I think in hindsight, it would have been good to do more sooner, to be a little bit more ambitious around our digital program at the start of the pandemic. Fortunately, we didn't choose to slow down. We didn't choose to put projects on hold. But I think we probably, had we known that this was going to go on for as long as it did, we could have been a little bit more ambitious.
Okay, and Chris, is it similar for you at Rathbones, or is there other things that you would have done differently?
I think it might sound slightly arrogant, but at a macro level, no, I don't think there is much that we would change. Actually, the response from technology, the response from the business, the response and the communication from the exec has been well ordered, and it's gone down really well with our staff and clients. At a micro level, we'll probably do some technology delivery things differently, and would have expedited maybe a laptop deployment or something along those. But we suffered negligible productivity loss. We've seen organic growth. Very similar story to Simon, to be fair. So I don't think there's anything that I would call out in particular.
Okay, and Nick, how about at Saunderson House? Anything you would have changed?
I think there's always a few opportunities to learn from anything, and as I mentioned before, I think we were in a good place in terms of sort of remote working arrangements and the like. But I think as we transmitted to full working from home environment as an organisation, which was doing that to a degree, but certainly not across the firm to the high level that obviously we've done over the last sort of 12 months or so. I think in those early days, there was a number of pockets around the firm where the familiarity of the technology to allow them to work efficiently and effectively was not as strong as it was in certain other areas, which presented them with a little bit a few challenges just to get themselves comfortable with their working environment. And that wasn't just technical. I mean, technology obviously played a key part of that, but actually it's around working from home arrangements when you've got people working in different ways, whether that's around their role, whether that's around their actual working environments as well, in terms of simple things like desks and chairs and the things that we sort of almost take for granted. When you've got different staff with different home arrangements, that is probably something that I think we would certainly take away as a bit of a learning from the pandemic in terms of thinking about that from a working point of view. It's all well and good giving someone a laptop to work at home for a few days, but when they're working at home for a year or two, then obviously that presents a different position. I think the other thing that I would mention specifically is just the power of unified communications. So we've spoken already about video conferencing, and as an organisation, it wasn't something we had really embraced prior to the pandemic to the level that we are now, and I think has become obviously internationally recognised. But actually, thinking about unified communications in its widest sense really helps in terms of productivity, particularly with staff, but I think potentially also with clients and engagement with them as well. And that obviously goes across all communication platforms, whether we're talking about video conferencing, whether we're talking about instant messaging, whether we're talking about email, whether we're talking about phone calls. That whole suite and the integration and ease of use and familiarity is very, very important. And I think actually that is something that, again, I think we would probably engage with more and actually been more focused on if we're sort of taking away some of the lessons that we've taken away from here. And that's probably because we're based in sort of one, arguably two office locations in the city. So our need for unified communications when we're all sort of in the same locations was limited before, but now we're working as a much more remote business, and I suspect that will continue into the future. Then that is definitely a learning that I think we would have taken away from this.
Thank you, Nick. And so we saw from Tom's slide that at an industry-wide level, the improvements in efficiencies, so taking IT costs as a percentage of revenue, have been actually pretty small over the last 5 years. So how do you ensure that you are generating value and therefore improving efficiency from any changes that have arisen from the pandemic? And I'll start with Chris on this one, please.
As a technology and change team, we've been working really closely with the business, and I think I touched upon it on the first question. Really, is how do we keep that appetite that the business have now got for technology, unified comms, and Nick's touched upon a number of points there, really. But how does it then tie into the client touch point, the client experience? where we had paper now and physical face-to-face or physical packs, how do we then swap and augment them in a digital way during the pandemic? And we've kind of just been stepping through those business processes. And I wouldn't say we've done a whole piece of work on business process re-engineering, but when this first kicked off, we almost knee-jerked into, well, how do we handle post? How do we handle printing and other kind of processes which were quite traditional? And we found really good solutions across the firm and digital capabilities that can replace that. And actually going through that process has actually helped us define and strengthen our digital strategy moving forward, so that we can take a lot of the learnings that we were, let's be honest, forced to make throughout everybody working at home and what the pandemic caused, and actually apply those to the digital strategy that we were already working on. So it's actually helped, and I think that's the way that we will help to continue to drive value and efficiency changes that came up throughout the pandemic.
Thank you, Chris. And is it similar for you, Simon? Or how do you invest in making sure that you are improving efficiencies?
Sure, James. Yeah, really similar to what Chris has just said there. So this, for me, has been a kind of once in a generation opportunity to really change how our business works. And my challenge is to take all of the good stuff that we've done, maintain the momentum that we've built, maintain the good relationships that we've built with the management across my business, and keep that going. Really nothing more to add other than that. Okay,
and Nick, how about Swanson House? How do you ensure that efficiencies are improving?
Yeah, I'd certainly echo a number of the points that have already been raised there by my fellow panelists. I think one of the things that is certainly I've been identified as part and parcel of this is the agility and speed that you can actually deliver things through when it's needed. And there was a number of opportunities that were presented to us during the pandemic to really look at things which arguably I think would have taken a lot longer in normal circumstances to adopt and deploy, that actually happened very, very quickly. And there's a number of examples I could use to do that. But how do we look at how that improves the efficiency of the business? Well, I think ultimately there are always going to be tangible elements associated with things, whether that's around profit margin, whether that's around new client wins, whether that's around the actual less tangible feedback from the business and people's perception of things. They are some of the metrics that we tend to use. And I think when you're looking at change generally, it's very important to consider post-implementation reviews, a number of which I'm sure we will be undertaking moving forward, to actually get that feedback and really look at the value that was derived from certain activities. And as we were talking about earlier, the lessons that have been taken away from those, so that we can make sure that they are driving tangible efficiency benefits associated with it as well.
Sure. Okay, so we've seen that the firms have reacted very much, or adapted even, in changes to technologies. So as we start to return to some form of normality, what sort of differences do you see a wealth manager in, say, 3 to 5 years' time compared to a wealth manager pre-COVID? And I'll start with Simon on this one.
Sure. So look, I hope that post-COVID we don't just revert back to how things were. I hope personally to see a bit more of a more sustainable future. Sustainability is really important to us as a business. So I hope to see people traveling less to see clients. I hope to see people using less paper. We printed 2 million pages less last year. I'd like to maintain at least part of those savings. And also less office space. We are, as many of my peers I'm sure are doing as well, adopting flexible working, and that means less space needed. So less space to heat and cool and light. I think for our people, I think what we'll see is a better balance between work and home life. So, we are absolutely embracing that. I've seen the benefits in my life of having that flexibility, and many of the people in my team are the same. And I hope and expect that the focus on digital tools, our client portal, improving processes and digitizing processes onto our client portal, using video calling, instant messaging technologies to really have a great experience for our clients that isn't so reliant on face-to-face meetings.
Okay, and Nick, are there any other differences that you foresee from a wealth management firm in a few years' time compared to one pre-COVID?
I'd love to say yes, but I think Simon has absolutely summarised everything perfectly. So I'm not sure actually that there is much more that I could add over and above that. I mean, we're certainly going through a number of those key points ourselves, and I think when I speak to my peers in the wider industry and sort of keep a watching brief in terms of what's going on, a lot of those are echoed. So I think Simon summarised it perfectly. Thanks very much for that.
Okay, how about you, Chris? Any further changes?
Probably similar. Simon did a really good job there. I guess I'll just reiterate actually a point that Nick made on the last question. I think we were probably guilty of trying to deliver this monolithic, perfect piece of change pre-COVID. COVID then forced us to deliver change, start to reduce the red tape, expedite delivery, and that iterative improvement. And as you've heard, from Nick and Simon, really, we're across the industry, we're all going to be delivering change in a much more iterative, almost expedited way. So, inertia is a recipe for failure, and it's going to get even quicker now. It's going to be months, not years, before that can materialize. So I think it's all about how we can deliver change, and I'm hoping that is the biggest difference that we continue to see, is that adoption of change. The business has to be ready to adopt it as well, which has always been a challenge. But actually the delivery teams being a lot more focused on delivering iterative improvement and business value throughout that change agenda. So that's certainly what I hope, and I think we can start to see that.
Okay, great. Just looking at time, I'll make this the last question. Now, we've seen in other research and talking to front office professionals that one of their biggest concerns at the moment is being able to build trust with the clients, and the difficulty with that is when you don't have face-to-face meetings. And so, have you taken any steps, or what steps do you intend to take to actually maintain or improve the value of the client experience if face-to-face meetings can't return in the immediate future? And I'll start with Chris on this, please.
So it's difficult, and we've probably touched upon a lot of the areas already. It's not just about setting up a Teams call. It's been more flexible. It's actually setting up webinars and events. Our exec and senior management have also done videos, general videos, not personalized per se, but it's all about finding that right communication method, cadence, medium. We've also expedited some of our digital deliveries, coming back to my previous point about starting to deliver iterative change and business value sooner, rather than, done is better than perfect almost. So we've released a lot of new functionality to clients so that they can start to use mobile app and other functionality within our systems. I guess that's probably about it, really. But we're looking at other things in future. VR has been mentioned. That's probably quite a niche one to have a virtual reality meeting. But let's investigate. Let's see what's possible. But for me, it's all about finding that balance between the physical, high touch, personal service that wealth managers give, and how digital and technology complements that.
Great. And Nick, what other steps have Saunderson House taken to ensure that there are improvements to the client experience in a non-face-to-face meeting environment?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things here, and I think actually a number of these principles apply as much to staff as they do to clients. And it's thinking about obviously that whole communication method, and ultimately engaging in a multitude of different ways. I believe that clients are not necessarily always going to want to meet with us moving forward face to face. I'm not sure that all clients will want to revert to that position. I think there is certainly for existing clients, there is some individuals who may not want to have that hour or two commute to us or us to go out and see them. Certainly while we continue in the pandemic position that we are in at the moment from an international perspective over the next year or two. So I think the need for face-to-face will fundamentally change moving forward. It will still be there and it's still an important commodity, but the substituting areas, as you spoke about, that sit around that are very, very important. Video conferencing is a medium, but it's not the only medium, of course, that really allows for that engagement to occur. And looking at different ways of engaging with people in a variety of different ways is incredibly important, I think. Whether that's through client portals and using appropriate secure communication methods, whether that's thinking around how the mobile device can be used more, as we pull and push services around that type of technology platform. Thinking around email, some people absolutely love it. I've got my reservations about it personally, but that's a different kettle of fish to those people who are really embedded with their emails. So, thinking about how you can most effectively and most efficiently utilize that medium to engage and ultimately improve that relationship and those touch points with a client, and not just thinking that the meeting is the only thing. But I think one of the things we've certainly done is a lot more communication and touch points with clients. That's so important. Keeping your name in the frame, keeping yourself at the front and center of the client relationship there. And just because you're not able to physically meet with the clients at the moment and potentially for a period of time moving forward, not using that as an excuse, if you like, to disappear into the background is actually the opposite. I think it should be an excuse to be touching out with clients even more frequently.
Thank you, Nick. And Simon, is there anything you'd like to add about the steps that you're taking?
I guess being a technology person, the thing that comes to mind is the use of our client portal. It's so important in the relationship that we have with a lot of our clients now. And during the pandemic, we sped up the deployment of our new client portal and mobile app. And there's a lot of momentum internally to continue to add features to that. But I guess not everything is a technology problem. And as far as improving the client experience, I touched on it at the start. It was actually all of the stuff that we produced and delivered, our fantastic marketing team and communication teams delivered, in addition to those one-to-one meetings on Teams and Zoom. We generated a huge amount of content, and we continue to do so compared to pre-pandemic, whether this is weekly newsletters, social media content, training events that we run, information sessions that we run for clients and prospects. We've run some really significant events as well, where it's a mix of a physical experience and a virtual experience. So we did something with the Royal Ballet at Christmas, and I think all of these things together meant that we've been able to maintain our client relationships, and in fact probably improve them in some instances, because we've given them more information, more access to what's going on than perhaps we did in the past.
Fantastic, and thank you, Simon, for that. So just looking at the time, I'll draw this panel discussion to a close now. So I'd just like to thank each of our panelists for your time. Thank you also to our speakers, and thank you once again to our sponsors, so Athena Global and Objectway. Most importantly, thank you for each and every one of you for logging on and listening. We very much hope you can join us at future webinars. So our next one is looking at the working environment in a post-pandemic situation. And then in June, we have our yearly review. So looking at the overview of the wealth management performance figures. And so very much hope you can join us then. And all details can be found on the Compeer website, and all slides will be shared after the webinar. So thank you once again. Until then, have a lovely evening and good night.